and care about their data privacy, you could take an open source model and deploy it on your own infrastructure. You can do it on premise, you can do it in a virtual private secure environment. And it will have nothing, whatever you do to post-train the model or running inference will have nothing to do with the original open source model maker. And that thereby you basically claim sovereignty, claim ownership of the model. And, but it remains to be seen, it's still a very big question, how economically all the model companies are going to make it sort of sustainable with an open source approach.
Don't you think the issue is the economics? You're spending billions of dollars to build this model, and if you open source them, you're not really monetizing it in the way that you can potentially monetize it. So that's why most of the companies are focusing on closed source to try to generate as much profit from the model. And then they open source the older versions. We've seen that with Grok, for example. We've seen that with even Llama and other, let's say, models in the US, where the frontier ones are closed source until they're able to generate some revenue, or at least some advantage, whether it's getting market share or otherwise. Do you think that is the main reason, or is there more of an ideological shift? And can China sustain making all these models open source, especially the frontier ones?
So I would make a distinction here between companies that that develop the frontier models plus a infrastructure business like cloud computing versus those companies that actually just only do the model. I think the companies that only do the model will have to think about how do you generate economics from open sourcing. The companies that actually have a cloud infrastructure, for example, in the United States, you have Google that has a full stack of the model and the cloud infrastructure. They also have chips, can monetize in other ways from the usage of the open source model. Obviously, Gemini is not an open source, but if you look at China, look at the example of Alibaba. We have our Quinn model is open source, but we also run our cloud business. And today, we're monetizing because people are training and also developing running inference on their models on our infrastructure, and thereby generating the economics. But I think it remains to be seen how, in the future, how can you get, especially consumers, pay for a monthly subscription and generate economics there. That remains to be seen. That's the biggest challenge in the Chinese market.
Chamath?
I mean, I think the reality is that when you adopt an open source model, you're going to need, as Joe said, all of these other things. You're going to need power. You're going to need infrastructure. Depending on the solution that you use, you're going to need a lot of natural resources, specialty chemicals, you're going to need battery systems, and then you're going to need all the know-how. And then on top of all that, you're going to need the capital and the financing. And so I think the reality is that the business model becomes more at the governmental level almost, because if you take an open source alternative, but then the infrastructure of the government can come in and help you with all of these other things, you're going to take it. And so I think that is yet to play out, but I think that's the real opportunity. Similarly, in the United States, it's all private. So the alternative is, you can't really take a spin of Grok or take a spin of Gemini and implement it on your own for the needs of your own population. But yet you still have to bear the cost of all of these other things. So if all of this was packaged and financed and turnkey and in a box, I think that's the ultimate best solution. That's probably where, international finance organizations and development banks probably need to play more of an evolving role over these next 10, 20 years.
Many of the conversations that I currently have and interviews that I would do, and I'm sure that you guys would go through the same thing, people talk about the AI bubble. And the bubble in a sense of, is it sustainable? Can we keep seeing the numbers that we're seeing? We've recently seen the issue with memory and memory availability, and we're not being able to produce memory enough. And when it comes to bubbles, I think there are two types of bubbles. There's the tulip mania bubble, which was completely made up. It blew up, people lost their money, and there was nothing left except the legacy of the bubble. And then there's the train and railway bubble of the UK of the 19th century, where people went and invested in railway tracks, which gave the UK the legacy of being one of the most connected places on earth through railways. So there was actually a tangible legacy that was left behind. In terms of tangible legacies for artificial intelligence, and I'm not saying it is a bubble, but let's assume that there was a set of bubbles along the way of the progress of artificial intelligence. Do you think that energy infrastructure is that? So is the safe bet investing in energy infrastructure? Is the safe bet investing in chips?
I think it's very much a TBD. And the reason is that the capability of these models can actually disrupt the underlying asset that you may think is safe. So the example that I would give you is we are 1 or 2 generations of models away from a model demonstrating that there's a certain chemistry that can effectuate, for example, a ultra-high storage battery, or that can effectuate a room temperature superconductor. If any of those things come to pass, we all would collectively have to underwrite what the actual value of our natural resources collectively as a world means. It would change how we use oil, it would change how we use nat gas, it would change how we build SMRs. So I think the honest answer is, this is why it's such a profoundly interesting moment. All of the things that we've used to underwrite productivity and GDP will get re-questioned because this superintelligence allows us to see things that, the frailty of the human condition we can't quite see yet today. And I think we should just be open-minded and prepared to deal with that as a community, because I think it's going to be complicated. So there's no bubble in that context.
Joe?
Yeah, Chamath just raised a very interesting point, which is there's no bubble if you these models operate on the current path of trajectory, but there's some breakthrough change, then the energy infrastructure, all that stuff that becomes a bubble in itself. It's sort of a bubble that's happens because conditions have changed. I wouldn't call it a corner case, but that's something that people should think about.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at right now, the massive amount of capex investment that all the hyperscalers, all the model companies are making, I mean, the latest quarter of reports that people are doubling their capex. It used to be last year, these hyperscalers are making $60 to $80 billion per company per year of capex, and now it's double, like 120 to 150 billion per year. It's astounding, just within a year, right? But here's the thing, I think a few things are driving it. Number one, people still believe in the scaling law, and now also the idea that inference time scaling is important because more compute resources will be allocated to inference, and inference is where everybody that uses AI will touch influence, as opposed to the few model companies that only do training, right? So a lot of capex that's going toward inference. And then finally, you have people making multimodal models that deal in generative rich media, videos, images, that will burn a lot of GPU resources. So people seeing this scaling law and multimodal world, and we haven't even talked about world models yet, and that's the validation that there will need to be more compute that need to be invested in. I don't think these trends are going to reverse or veer off. In the future, people will still continue to, for example, are people going to consume less videos? I don't think so. So in that sense, there's no bubble. But having said that, people are investing, anticipating future demand as opposed to. Yeah. I think there could be, in certain sectors you see, like memory, you see shortages today, but just the massive amounts of investment, it's kind of hard to think about ROI. I hate to be the CFO of one of these companies because they have to, they're faced of having to explain ROI to investors. They can't. They can't do that.
Yeah.
The theme for 2026, for those of you who've gone to Davos and for some of the other conferences and some of the other discussions, is AI agents. And agents are the name of the game. People have to actually try to work with agents, deploy, develop, and utilize the different agents that are going to do different tasks. We have a number of heads of state and heads of government in the room. The question that you're going to get when you say that is, we haven't started with deploying AI already, and you guys are now moving into agents. So if someone wants to leapfrog, someone who hasn't done anything yet, whether it's a nation in Africa or a nation in Latin America or a nation in Southeast Asia, what would your advice be? Should they go into the generative AI model side of things? Should they try to do a specific thing with agents? What would be your advice if you were advising them?
Neither. I think you have to pick a model, and I think you need to deploy it inside your own borders with your own power and roughly your own people, and be able to use it for a handful of very useful and practical solutions to everyday problems, whether it's public health or whether it's governmental services, or frankly, the most important and valuable one is education, which is being able to create a system that teaches the young people in your country how to learn in this new world where this supercomputer will be available to everybody. All this other stuff, I think, is very speculative. It's exactly what Joe said. Every frontier has a new language that it uses to justify further investment. And I think today, because there isn't a super clear ROI, agents are the next vernacular that we've chosen to justify the next $200 or $300 billion of investment. The more practical solution, I think, is to be one generation and one step behind that and say, let's go and educate our kids, cure some disease, and make it easier to renew our driver's license. And if you just do that, I think you're going to have a happy population.
So quality of life improvement.
I think so.
Joe?
I totally agree. I think governments have to think about what is the application where the use of AI will be productive and useful in education, in healthcare, and you should start with the use cases first. What is the right application for AI? I think the idea of building up the full stack infrastructure, everything, is a game for large economies. It's like building up a military industry. It's not for everybody. So once you've identified the use case and the applications, then the question is, all right, whose technology are we going to leverage on? And on that front, I believe that open source is the best way, is the most secure way where you can have most control of your own AI.
Gentlemen, that was a great discussion. I know that we could have gone on for so much longer, but thank you for your insights and thank you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.